Many people growing up in the early 2000s had that one big childhood MMO that they grew up playing all the time as a kid. For me, that MMO was a little game called Disney's Toontown Online. It was a nonsensical game about cartoon animals fighting against evil corporate robots called cogs. It was clunky as hell, but was iconic in its art style and its premise. And as any fan of Toontown knows, Disney pulled the plug on all the game's servers back in 2013. Since then, there have been many attempts at fan revivals and fan servers of the game. These attempts have had countless controversies and rocky moments, and after all the dust had settled in 2022, there are now two main servers that share a majority of modern Toontown players. These two servers being Toontown Rewritten and Toontown Corporate Clash. And when somebody who's played the game as a kid wants to jump back in for some nostalgia, they'll probably choose between one of those two games for their fix. I've tried out both of these servers on and off for the past few years, and now I'm in yet another spurt of playing the game again. However, what interests me most about this dichotomy is the different approaches that these two fan servers take in their development. For those who don't know, Toontown Rewritten generally focuses on recreating the original Toontown experience as closely as possible, with some exceptions here and there. On the other hand, Toontown Corporate Clash focuses on reimagining parts of the game and adding new content that was never in the original scope of the main Toontown Online game. These two approaches earn each fan server a different subset of fans who prefer one direction over the other. Right now, I am mainly playing Corporate Clash, but that doesn't mean I like one server more than the other. What I do want to talk about, however, is the approach that each game takes with their storytelling. Because Toontown Corporate Clash is attempting to expand on and change the original storyline, I think the way they're going about it deserves some attention. The main ways the dev team is adding story content to the game is through a mix of in-game content plus cutscenes, comics hosted on their website, and lore deep dive videos on the server's YouTube channel. These methods of adding new story to the game not only vary, but they also have wildly different impacts. Some of these feel natural with the game's lighthearted tone, but other story choices just leave me scratching my head. For the sake of explanation, I'm going to divide my observations into three different categories: the good, the weird, and the silly. I know that seems like an odd choice of categories, but hear me out and you'll see how oddly inconsistent Corporate Clash's story changes can be. Let's start out with the good, that being the most natural and organic additions to the Toontown formula. One of the more impressive ways new lore is incorporated into Toontown Corporate Clash is exemplified through the Operation Break the Law series of updates from 2019 and 2020. These updates told a story centered around an offensive against the game's robot antagonists, Cogs Incorporated, specifically the home of the corporation's legal teams, the Lawbot headquarters. What is so surprising about these updates is that the game devs made the bold decision of changing and removing an aspect from the original Toontown Online game: the Chief Justice. The Chief Justice, or CJ, was one of the four main bosses of Toontown Online, the leader of the Lawbot department. The CJ had been around since Lawbot HQ was first added to the original Toontown Online all the way back in 2006. As such, he had some nostalgia tied to his character. If the Corporate Clash team wanted to replace him, they would need a very good reason to. However, I believe they found one. For this, we need to look at the Corporate Clash comics series. These online comics, starting in December of 2018, center around a dilemma with the Lawbot department. The chairman of Cogs Inc., who I might add is a literal chair, by the way, calls the Chief Justice into his office for an annual review, letting him know that he's on thin ice, and he has been wasting funds trying to practice criminal law when he should be instead practicing corporate law. Cogs Inc. is not a government, after all. Over the course of 2019, the in-game Break the Law event saw Toons causing mayhem in the courtyard of Lawbot HQ. As a result, the next important comic came at the end of 2019, a full year after the last one. At this annual review, the chairman is disappointed with the incompetent CJ failing to fix his department. However, right before he can deliver the pink slip, the CJ resigns himself, shocking the chairman. It turns out the CJ was being lazy on purpose, coasting along in his position, surprised that the chairman even hired him in the first place, since he knew the CJ didn't have any grasp on corporate law. Flipping the script, he blames the chairman for his incompetence in not firing him sooner. The CJ then finally slams the door on his old business partner by putting on a Hawaiian shirt and glasses for his retirement, reminding the chairman to pay his pension, and stealing the goddamn rug from his office before leaving the company for good. As a result, Corporate Clash had removed a boss from the game. However, I believe they softened the blow by giving the CJ a big send-off, turning the tables on his own boss and making him even more memorable in his departure than he would have been if they had just left him in the game. But you might be wondering, if they removed the Chief Justice from the game, who would be the Lawbot Department's boss now? Well, the Corporate Clash team had that covered. The conclusion of the Break the Law update brought in someone for the job, a literal witness stand-in to fill in for the CJ while the board searched for a more permanent replacement. This Skelecog, named Atticus Wing, would serve as a stopgap until the new Lawbot boss, the Chief Litigation Officer, would be unveiled in 2020. However, the temporary witness stand-in would have some more, well, questionable lore added to him. As for the weird side of Corporate Clash lore, one avenue of content that rather blindsided me when I first heard about it is a specific handful of YouTube videos on the YouTube channel run by Corporate Clash. I want to draw special attention to the deep dive character reviews, podcast-style videos made by the Corporate Clash team talking about this design philosophy and backstories of specific characters. There are only a handful of these type of videos up on the channel right now, mainly going over the new mini-boss cogs that the game added. However, these videos concern me due to how shockingly in-depth the developers go into these backstories for these one-note mini-boss characters. For example, the first episode of this series focused on our friend Atticus Wing from the last segment. As we established, this cog was a stopgap boss, a literal witness stand-in for the Lawbot HQ boss battle during much of the Operation Break the Law update cycle. Despite the temporary nature of this character, the devs still went all out in making this video pertaining to Atticus's background. They went over countless details, like the boss's time as a college student, his debts, his legal adoption of a colleague, and the growth of his empathy as a character. Keep in mind, this is all for a throwaway boss that looks like this.
Yeah.
They didn't need to do this, especially since none of this lore shows up or applies at all in-game. He looks just like any other Skelecog, and you fight him, and he ends up dying in an albeit well-made animated short on the YouTube channel. However, that means that all of that random lore was dumped for nothing. Look, don't get me wrong, I don't hate the lore building they're trying to do with these deep dive videos, but it just seems a little too out of left field for me. Keep in mind that the cogs are evil corporate robots that exist in this game to have literal pies thrown at them and to make them explode.
They're bombs.
And yet here we have a few of the devs putting very unnecessarily human traits onto them. I'll admit that could be an interesting idea, but they seem too on the fence about it to actually committing to messing with the tone of the game. Just a quick editor's note, I'd like to mention that there was a bit more effort put into expressing this sort of idea and storytelling they wanted to do with the witness stand-in, as on the Twitter account for Corporate Clash, they did show an in-progress scrapped animation relating to the video that would turn into that podcast that I mentioned. The devs were still going harder into the backstory of Atticus, but it still does seem a bit odd to me. However, I do admit that there was a bit more research I had to do on this. Anyway, back to the video. Aside from the online comic series, very little of the lore is brought up in the game itself. I understand that not all Corporate Clash devs are making these videos, nor even care about them, but it comes off to me as if these weird lore videos are just fanfiction written by a handful of overenthusiastic devs. These story tidbits just don't fit in as seamlessly as the more overarching narrative of the CJ and the Break the Law comics, like I mentioned. It just left a weird taste in my mouth is what I'm trying to say. Now, with all that out of the way, we have one more category left to go. Finally, we make it around to the more silly side of Corporate Clash's story writing. In the last section, I mentioned some lore additions that I didn't think fit the more cartoonish style of the game. However, there are lore choices that I believe perfectly match Toontown's silly vibe. This would be the content of the game's holiday updates. One aspect that modernizes and adds to the humor of the game are the boss fights that take place on holidays such as April Fool's and Halloween. There are many silly boss fights in the game, but there are a few highlights. In the 2019 Halloween update, for example, 2 boss fights were added, both using the same cue. The more common of the 2 bosses will be discussed a bit later, but there is a small chance for Toons to encounter a boss called Sads, a literal parody of Sans from Undertale. Look, I haven't played Undertale, but I heard this boss even adapts game mechanics from that game into Corporate Clash, such as blocking UI elements and making the battle an endurance competition by dodging all attacks. They also included this Sads character in a non-canon meme comic on the website. Another great running gag style boss in Corporate Clash comes in the form of 2 not-so-ordinary bloodsuckers. Beginning in 2018, Halloween marked the appearance of the nicely named Count Erclaim, the vampire lawbot contractor boss, which Toons fight inside his very own haunted office. The comics even tie into this, where a Toon character called Resistance Ranger Rocky is repeatedly harried by the Count, raiding his fridge every single Halloween night. Despite his best attempts to stop the Count, the elusive vampire returns to wreak havoc once again every year and make Rocky's life a living hell. That is, until a change occurred on April Fool's Day of 2022, where another new comic announced a new blood-sucking boss that ruined Rocky's day. Instead of Count Erclaim, Rocky returns to his home one night to instead find the totally ripped Count Erfit raiding his fridge for protein supplements. Despite his therapist telling him to welcome his problems with open arms, Rocky does not take too kindly to his uninvited guest, and seals his own fate by telling him that vampires stink. However, Rocky's rudeness backfires on him, as the bodybuilding Count carves a path of destruction against the helpless Toon. This comic does walk a fine line between what is canon or not in terms of world building, but the visual style alone makes it the most enjoyable comic on the entire website. The montage of panels with the most shitposty MS Paint designs I've ever seen, alongside actual suspiciously detailed art, was one punch to the face after the other. I mean, they even threw in a Spore screenshot in there. At one point, they also bring Sads back into the comic for a little cameo. It's stupid comics like this that show me that the Corporate Clash team is dedicated to their work and they're proud of what they've done. Despite all the missteps the game's had in the past, I'm excited to see what they have in store, not just with gameplay, but also with the story of this classic childhood MMO. Here's to hoping the 1.3 update is a great one. I'm Graystar2426, and thank you for watching.